All right, welcome back to lesson 2. It's time to start creating our productivity app. So before we begin, we want to make sure that we're creating things at the proper scale. So to do that, I'm going to activate my Shapes button here, go to my Shapes menu, come down here to the people icon, and I'm going to pull one of these people and bring them into the scene. To do this, I'm going to use my grip button. I'm going to choose this top guy here, and I'm going to bring him in, and I'm just going to set him over here as a reference. This guy has been brought in at what we call one-to-one scale, meaning this is the scale that we should be creating at. So that's a good habit to get into when you first start a project. Always just bring a person in using your grip button. All right, let's go ahead now and start creating our menu. So to create our menu, we're going to bring in a new shape. So I'm going to hit my Shapes button, go to my shape controls here, and I'm going to use the UI settings. And I like this round shape here. It gives me the opportunity to create boxes with round corners. So instead of using my grip button to pull in the object, I'm going to use my trigger button this time. I hit my trigger button and you can see the shape is now loaded into my handset. And then by using my trigger button, I can draw shapes in the air. So I'm going to go ahead and create a basic menu interface here. All right, that looks good. Now, eventually, I'm going to scale this down because I want this to be roughly shoulder width across. So obviously, we're too big now, but we can adjust that later. So our menu, you can see we've got some problems with it. Right now, it's a little too thin, and it's also just sort of floating out here in space, not aligned to anything. And we're going to fix all that here in a second. So let's start with the scale issue. Let's make this a little bit thicker. To do that, we're going to use what we call a gizmo. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what a gizmo is a graphic overlay that appears on top of an object with handles that you can grab. And each one of these handles does different things. It allows you to move your object, rotate your object, scale it, and edit it with precision. So let's activate our gizmo. First of all, we have to turn it on. Click my Shapes button. This triangle icon up here is my gizmo setting. I'm going to toggle that on. And for this, I want to make sure my space is set to local and my mode is set to classic. Classic should be the default setting in your headset. All right, so to activate the gizmo on this object, I'm going to reach out and touch it. And as soon as I touch it, you'll see this check mark button appears on my handset. I'm going to click that, and my gizmo appears. So now I can move my object along axes by grabbing these little triangle handles here. I can also rotate the object. And using these cubes behind the arrows, I can scale my object equidistance in both directions. So I want to make my object thicker this way. So I'm going to grab this blue cube handle here and pull. And you can see I am enlarging and making my object thicker. That's looking good. Okay, we're in good shape. All right, let's go ahead and create some buttons now. So I'm going to use the same technique I used to create this menu, except this time I'm going to toggle this thumbstick to the right, so I've got this box with a line through it. Now you notice when I draw, my proportions are constrained and I can draw a perfect square. So now I've got a good looking button here. So for this menu interface, we want 5 buttons on our menu. So to do that, I want to duplicate this object. I don't want to have to draw it over and over again. To duplicate an object, I pick it up. You'll see now I have a button on my handset that looks like a box with a plus sign in it. That's my duplication button. Every time I hit that button, the object I'm holding in my hand duplicates. So here I have 5 buttons, but we've got a problem. I now have to go in and align each one of these buttons to the menu face, and that's going to take a long time. I don't want to do that. There's got to be a better way. So let me show you how to duplicate things with precision. I'm going to use my undo button here. Press that just to get back to one object. Now, one way I could do this is I could come over here and I could just sort of try to eyeball this and line up my object. But then my object's probably going to be all in a weird shape. I'm actually going to make that a different color so you can see it easier. To recolor an object, you hit your Shapes button, come down here to your paint bucket, and I'm going to choose a little bit lighter shade of gray, and just holding down on my trigger button, anything I touch now turns that color. All right, so now you've learned how to recolor things, but you can see my button's all in the wrong place. It doesn't look good at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a function called snap to surface. So to snap an object to the surface of another object, you grab the first object and you begin moving it closer to the object. You notice that line appears between the objects. If I keep going, eventually a circle appears on the other surface. As soon as that circle appears, I'm going to hit this top button on my controller. That's the snap to surface button. As soon as I do that, ShapesXR is automatically going to align my object so that it's parallel and perpendicular to the background. And notice I'm still holding the background with holding the object with my grip button. So I'm going to move this into place, put that right there for my first location. All right, looking good. So now I want to duplicate this button along a straight line. To do that, I'm going to activate my gizmo again, touch the object, hit the check mark button, and we're going to move it along this line. And you'll notice when I'm holding the gizmo, my duplication button reappears. So I'm going to come into the first position, duplicate. And for this, I'm just going to eyeball it, put my next button there, duplicate, and duplicate. Now, clearly we have a problem. Our background is not the right size, so I'm going to turn the gizmo on there. Now, I could scale with this gizmo. I could grab this here and scale, but if you notice, it scales equidistance in both directions, and that's not what I want. Instead, I want to use the scale gizmo. So I'm going to come down here to mode, and I'm going to choose scale. Activate the gizmo. And now you can see the gizmo looks different. This allows me to scale just in one direction. So I'm going to grab this handle down here. I'm going to pull this out and put it right about there. All right, our menu's starting to take shape. I'm actually going to extend that just a little bit there, make that a little bit bigger. All right, we're looking good. Now, let's add some icons to our buttons. So for this prototype that we're designing, we're going to use some very specific icons for the last two buttons here. So I'm going to activate my Shapes menu, choose Shapes. I'm in the UI settings, and I'm going to come down here and I'm going to choose this eyeball. So I'm going to bring that in. Now you're not going to be able to see that on the background, so let's recolor that. I'm going to go to my colors and make that white. I'm going to pick this up, and using my snap to surface feature, I'm going to snap to the surface. Now the eyeball's too big, so I'm going to use my thumbstick. I can move my thumbstick left or right to scale the object while I'm holding it. So I'm going to scale this down to about where I want, put that right there. For our fourth icon over, I'm going to choose this pencil with the whiteboard. So snap to surface, scale down, looking good. And for these next three buttons, you can put down whatever you want. So go ahead and put whatever icons you want on your buttons. All right, we got a pretty good looking UI here. So let's go ahead and add just a little bit more design to this menu. We've preloaded some assets into your headset that you can use specifically for these lessons. To access those, you're going to hit this Shapes button. You're going to choose your Shapes menu. Come down here to the fifth icon. This is your import menu. This is where you can actually find objects that you've uploaded that you want to bring in to your own projects. We'll show you how to do that in a little bit. But for now, you're going to see this list of preloaded assets that you're going to use for this lesson. These lists, you pull these things into the environment just like you would an object. So we're going to use our grip button. So I want you to scroll down to rectangle blur 01. Using your grip button, grab it and bring it into the environment, and then transparency mode, choose default. Now this doesn't look like much, but what this is going to be is this actually is going to be a shadow that we're going to put behind the buttons. So to make it look like a shadow, we need to recolor it. Hit your Shapes button, go to your colors, choose black, and choose multiply, and then recolor it. So now we've got a nice shadow PNG that we can use as a shadow for our buttons. So let's go ahead now and let's snap our shadow to that back of the menu. And then let's position that right about there. Okay, that's looking good. It's a little dark, so let's change the color. If I go in now and try to grab this or change the color, I may actually grab the background or grab things that I don't want to grab. So we're going to lock some of these objects so we don't accidentally move them. So to lock objects, we're going to hit our Shapes button, come down here to this padlock icon, and then we're going to make sure this lock icon over here is chosen. And you can see I've got the padlock in my handset. Holding down on my trigger button now, anything I touch gets locked. So I'm going to come in here and lock everything except for that shadow PNG. I'm going to go back into Gizmo mode just to get out of the lock mode. And so now when I try to select something, it's only going to select that back transparency, which is exactly what I want. So I'm going to grab this handle here on my Gizmo. And if you're in classic mode, which you might be, it's okay. You can use it in that mode as well. And just like we did the buttons, I'm going to come in and I'm going to duplicate each one behind the buttons. Looking good. I think our shadows are a little too dark, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here with my paint, and I am going to bring down my alpha channel just a little bit. Maybe that's a little too much. Split the difference and lighten those up just a little bit. All right, there you go. All right, so we're looking good. Let's go ahead and unlock everything that we just locked because we're going to move our interface. So I'm going to hit my Shapes button, go down to my padlock, and unlock all. So everything's unlocked now. And now I want to select everything. To do this, I'm going to look at my dominant hand controller. If you look on the thumbstick, you're going to see one of 4 icons. You'll either see this little worm, or you'll see this square, a circle, or a line. These are your different selection tools. To toggle between them, you just move your thumbstick back and forth. So go ahead and make sure that you're on that little squiggly worm. That's what we're going to use. When I have that selected, I'm going to use my trigger button. And you'll notice when I'm holding down on my trigger button, there's this light blue line that I'm kind of drawing in the air. Anything that line intersects gets selected. So I can come in here and select individual things. So I'm going to select just the icons for a moment. And now you can see I can move the icons just by themselves. So I'm actually going to recess those into the buttons just a little bit. I think that looks a little bit better. And now I'm going to go over to my sphere selection tool, and I'm going to hold down on my trigger button and make this sphere, and anything inside that sphere gets selected. Now my entire prototype is selected. So what I'm going to do here is with everything selected, I'm going to reach in and touch the objects. And you'll notice now I have a button on my controller that looks like a box on top of a box. That's my grouping button. I'm going to press that button, and now everything's grouped together. So I can treat it as one object. All right, so clearly, as I said at the beginning, our menu's a little too big. I want it to be shoulder width. So while I'm holding my object, I can use my thumbstick, and I can just shrink it down to get it roughly shoulder width. So that's looking pretty good there. Now, to align my menu with the floor, make sure that it's aligned with the world, I'm going to turn on what we call our world grid. So to turn on the world grid, I'm going to hit my hamburger menu button, come down here to the cogwheel, the general settings, and under snapping, I'm going to hit world. Now when I pick up this object, you'll notice there's a bunch of floating dots in the air, and I can snap this object to these different dots. You'll also notice in this mode, when you try to move your object, ShapesXR forces your object either at a 90-degree or a 45-degree angle. And this just allows you to make sure that you're aligning things with precision. So I'm going to come in here and align this with a center dot in front of our guy here. And so that's roughly where I want the prototype to be for now. But we're facing the wrong way. The buttons should be facing him. So I'm going to once again activate my Gizmo. And since I have everything grouped together, I no longer have my checkmark button. So how do I get the Gizmo up? In this case, I'm going to select with my little squiggly worm tool here, and then release, and then my Gizmo appears. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate this around, but I want to rotate it to 90 degrees. So under my Gizmo settings, Shapes menu, Gizmo settings, I'm going to turn on custom steps. And I'm going to set my rotation here. This is a little handle. I'm going to grab it with my trigger button. I'm going to set it at 90 degrees. So now when I come in here, you can see I've got these dots I can snap to. And each one of these dots will help me rotate my object with precision. So I'm going to turn it completely around. Actually, we're going to do a whole 180 degrees. 180-degree turn. And now I want to rotate this a little bit this way. Now I could eyeball it like this, or if I want to rotate with precision, I can go back into my rotation tool, and let's set my rotation now at 15 degrees. So select to activate the Gizmo, and now my dots are 15 degrees apart. So let's rotate that at 30 degrees. And so now I've got a menu that's properly placed right in front of my person exactly where I want them to be. All right, that's it for lesson 2. We will see you in the next lesson.